I once believed I had married into a perfect family, the kind people envy from afar. My husband, Ethan, promised me a forever built on trust, and his mother, Margaret, welcomed me with a smile that felt warm, until I realized it was a mask. Behind closed doors, I became the joke of their family chat, the outsider mocked in whispers I was never meant to hear. The night Ethan walked out, Margaret laughed as if I had been defeated. But what they didn't know was that I had been building a silent empire, waiting for the right moment to rise. The early days of my marriage felt like stepping into a picture-perfect postcard. I would wake up to sunlight streaming across satin sheets, Ethan's voice humming in the kitchen as he prepared coffee, and Margaret, my mother-in-law, calling me dear with that sweet honeyed tone. On Sundays, she would host family brunches, making sure I sat at the head of the table beside her, as if she had already embraced me as a daughter. For a while, I believed it. I let myself sink into the illusion that I had finally been accepted into a family that valued me. I had grown up dreaming of such belonging. When Margaret clasped a diamond bracelet around my wrist on our wedding day, whispering that she was so proud of her new daughter, I nearly cried. Ethan squeezed my hand as though to seal the moment. In photographs, we looked like the epitome of harmony, smiling, glowing, perfectly in sync. The ring on my finger gleamed under the flashbulbs, a circle of gold that I thought was a testament to Ethan's devotion. But I didn't yet know that Margaret herself had chosen it, purchased it, and told Ethan it was the only ring suitable for a woman like her. For months, I clung to the façade. I learned to cook Margaret's favorite recipes, tried to dress in the elegant style she admired, and kept quiet when she corrected me in front of guests. Whenever she introduced me to her friends, she would smile as though she adored me, telling them how lucky Ethan was. I wanted to believe every word, but then there were cracks, small hairline fractures in the glass of perfection. It was in her eyes first, a flash of something cold, a glint that lingered a second too long when I laughed too freely, or when Ethan brushed my cheek in public. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, masked by her familiar smile, but I saw it. And once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. At first I told myself it was my imagination. Maybe she was tired, maybe I was sensitive. But then Ethan began to change too. He came home later, his excuses vague. His phone, once left carelessly on the counter, now stayed locked and face down. His kisses grew shorter, absent-minded, as though I were an obligation rather than a partner. One evening, when he dozed off on the couch, his phone buzzed with a notification. I hadn't intended to look, but the screen lit up, and I saw something that made my blood still. A message preview. She really thinks she belongs here. My pulse raced. The sender was his mother. I froze, torn between waking him and pretending I had seen nothing. Instead, I reached for the phone, hands trembling, and opened the message. What I found made the floor drop from beneath me. There it was, a group chat. Margaret, Ethan, his sister Sarah, even a few cousins, and me, the subject of their jokes. They called me the outsider, the actress, the gold digger. Margaret's words were the sharpest. She thinks that ring is from Ethan. If only she knew who really paid for it. The others laughed along with her, adding emojis, mocking comments, each one twisting deeper into my chest. I read message after message, bile rising in my throat. She tries so hard, it's pathetic. Wait until Ethan finally wakes up and gets rid of her. And then Ethan's own contribution. Don't worry, I'll handle it soon. She won't see it coming. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might scream, but I didn't. Instead, I set the phone back down and sat perfectly still, my face calm, my breath even. Inside, however, something fractured. The perfect postcard I had been living in was nothing but a counterfeit print. The harmony I clung to was a carefully orchestrated performance, and I was the fool playing her part. Margaret's sweet smiles, Ethan's fading warmth, none of it was real. They had built a theater around me, and I had believed in the stage lights. Now the curtains had ripped open, and I was staring at the ugliness beneath. I looked at Ethan sleeping peacefully on the couch, oblivious. My heart did not ache the way I thought it would. Instead, a strange clarity settled over me. I could almost hear Margaret's laugh echoing in the back of my mind, cold and triumphant. But I did not crumble. I stared at the glowing phone on the table, its screen dark again, and whispered to myself, "So this is the game." In the days that followed, I wore my mask well. I let Margaret believe she had won, that her barbed words and Ethan's coldness had crushed me. I became quieter, smaller, almost invisible. I volunteered to take on every chore in the house, cooking, cleaning, running errands, while Margaret watched with smug satisfaction. When she mocked the way I folded linens or corrected how I seasoned the roast, I simply smiled and nodded. She saw submission. She saw weakness. What she didn't see was calculation. Ethan noticed too, though for different reasons. He began treating me like I was fading from his life, as though he had already written me off. He stayed out late, scrolled endlessly on his phone at dinner, and avoided my gaze. Margaret would smirk at me during those dinners, eyes glinting as if to say, "You're losing him. You were never worthy of him." I let them think it. I let them revel in their little victory. Inside, however, a storm was building. Their laughter, their disdain. It no longer cut me down. It sharpened me. I became a shadow in my own home. Yes, but a shadow can see everything. One evening, after a particularly vicious remark from Margaret about how Ethan deserved a real woman, I excused myself from the table. I climbed the stairs, entered the study, and shut the door. My heart was steady as I opened my laptop. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow across my face, a reflection of the steel taking root inside me. I had seen the group chat once, but now I wanted everything. Every word, every insult, every plan. Ethan's iCloud was still linked, and with just a few keystrokes, I had full access. The messages poured onto my screen like poison from a vial. They mocked my clothes, my laugh, the way I carried myself. Margaret wrote, "She clings to Ethan like a child. Pathetic." Then came Ethan's words, "Don't worry. I'll make sure she walks away with nothing. The prenup ensures she gets zero. I just need a little more time." My stomach clenched, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I copied every message, every sneer, every calculated betrayal, and stored them in a hidden folder. My fingers flew across the keyboard, precise, relentless. This wasn't pain anymore. This was evidence. But that wasn't all. After closing the chat, I opened another set of files, my own. Deeds to properties I had purchased years before Ethan. Investment portfolios quietly growing in value. Accounts under my name alone, untouchable by anyone else. Margaret thought she had stripped me down to nothing. Ethan thought he held all the power with his prenup. They didn't know that I had built walls they could never breach. Page after page, balance after balance, I reviewed everything. The numbers glowed back at me like a hidden army, silent but unstoppable. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the fragile woman they believed me to be. I was prepared. And as I scrolled, something shifted in me. The despair that had threatened to drown me in the beginning began to ebb, replaced by a rising tide of strength. For the first time, I could see the battlefield clearly. They thought they were hunting me, but in truth, they had already stepped into my trap. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the laptop illuminating the hard lines of my face. My reflection in the screen no longer looked like the woman they mocked. It looked like someone reborn, someone dangerous. I whispered to the empty room, a vow more than a statement. Her birthday will be her funeral. And I meant every word. The more evidence I gathered, the calmer I appeared. Ethan mistook my serenity for surrender, and Margaret believed I had finally been broken. They had no idea that every smile I offered, every nod of obedience, was just another stitch in the net I was weaving around them. At dinner one night, Ethan leaned back in his chair, glass of wine in hand, and sighed heavily. "You know, Amanda, I think we rushed into things. Maybe marriage isn't what I thought it would be." His words were casual, almost careless, but I caught the sharpness hidden underneath. I looked at him with wide, trusting eyes and whispered, "I understand, Ethan. I just want what's best for you." Inside, I pressed the record button on my phone tucked beneath the napkin on my lap. He kept talking, careless now that he thought I was too meek to fight back. "Honestly, my mom's right. You're not really on my level, but don't worry. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Just don't expect anything after the divorce. The prenup is airtight. You'll walk away with nothing, but hey, maybe that's a blessing for you. Teaches you a lesson." Every word was a blade, but instead of cutting me, they carved the shape of his downfall. My phone captured it all: the tone, the arrogance, the betrayal. Later that night, I replayed the recording, listening not with heartbreak but with cold satisfaction. I sent the file to a secure folder, then attached it to an email addressed to my lawyer. With one click, I had transformed Ethan's own voice into a weapon, but I knew audio alone wouldn't be enough. They could spin it, twist it, claim I misunderstood. I needed something undeniable, something that would pierce through every lie Margaret had built around me. That opportunity came from the last person I expected, Sarah, Ethan's sister. She had always been distant, a ghost in the family gatherings, speaking only when spoken to. I thought she disliked me, perhaps even despised me as much as Margaret did. But one afternoon she showed up at my door, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I can't keep watching this," she said quietly. "The way they treat you, it's wrong." I blinked at her, unsure if this was another trick, but then she pulled out her phone and showed me a video. In it, Margaret sat at a small dinner with friends, laughing cruelly. "Amanda, she's nothing. Just a maid with a marriage certificate. She thinks she's one of us, but she'll never be more than a leech." The women around her laughed, raising their glasses in agreement. The words hit me like ice water, not because they hurt. I had long since stopped feeling pain from her insults, but because now I had her mask slipping in full view, immortalized on camera. Sarah's eyes filled with guilt. "She treats me the same way, you know. I just never had the courage to stand against her. But you can." For a moment, I saw my own reflection in Sarah's tears, a woman suffocated by Margaret's iron grip. I placed a hand on hers and nodded. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means." When she left, I sat in silence, staring at the video replaying on a loop. Margaret's voice dripped with venom, her laughter echoing. It wasn't just a private sneer anymore, it was a confession. I opened my laptop and began assembling the pieces, the group chat screenshots, the audio recordings of Ethan, the video Sarah had given me, even clips from the hidden camera Margaret herself had installed, which I had quietly redirected to my own cloud storage. Piece by piece, I was building a bomb, one that would detonate not with fire, but with truth. Each file was a nail in the coffin of the illusion they had created. And when it all came together, no one in that family would ever look at Margaret or Ethan the same way again. The cursor blinked on the screen as I organized the final folder. My fingers hovered over the keys, my breath steady. I imagined the silence that would fall when the lies unraveled, the looks on their faces when their own words condemned them. I whispered to myself, voice steady, sharp as steel. They wanted a performance. I'll give them a finale. Margaret's birthday unfolded like a royal coronation. The chandeliers dripped light across the gilded ballroom, the air thick with perfume and money. Guests arrived in tailored suits and glittering gowns, each eager to bask in Margaret's glow. She sat at the head of a long banquet table, a jeweled brooch pinned to her chest, presiding like a queen surveying her kingdom. Ethan stood close by, dutiful and proud, while I arrived deliberately late, slipping into the room like a shadow. The whispers began at once. "She looks exhausted. Surprised she even showed up." I didn't respond. I chose a seat far from the center, my silence a mask they mistook for defeat. Margaret caught my eye, her lips curling into the faintest smirk as if to say, "See, you don't belong here." The evening droned on with speeches, laughter, and toasts. Margaret thrived on every compliment, every shallow proclamation of admiration. She raised her glass high, preparing to give her own triumphant address, when the ballroom's lights dimmed unexpectedly. Murmurs spread, confused glances darting across the tables. Then the massive screen behind her flickered to life. At first, a few lines of text appeared, a thread of messages pulled from the family group chat. Gasps rippled through the room as guests leaned forward, squinting at the words glowing in the dark. "She's just an actress pretending to be one of us." Pathetic. Then came Margaret's damning contribution. "That ring. She thinks Ethan gave it to her. If only she knew who paid." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Heads turned sharply toward Margaret. Her face blanched, her smile frozen in place. "Turn that off," she hissed, but the images kept rolling, line after line of mockery, each message twisting the knife deeper. Ethan stood rigid, his jaw locked, his hand twitching at his side. Guests began to whisper furiously, "Is this real? She wrote that?" The perfect illusion Margaret had so carefully constructed cracked open for all to see. And then the footage shifted. A video clip began to play, grainy but unmistakable. Margaret, seated at a smaller gathering, laughing cruelly as she declared, "Amanda, she's nothing but a maid with a marriage certificate." Her companions chuckled, raising glasses in agreement. The sound echoed through the ballroom like thunder. Gasps erupted. A woman at the table covered her mouth. Someone else muttered, "Unbelievable." I didn't move from my chair. I let the evidence speak for itself. Every cruel word Margaret had hidden behind her smile was now laid bare, her mask shattered in front of the very audience she had sought to impress. She rose abruptly, her voice shrill. "This is manipulated, lies!" But no one seemed convinced. The screen continued to roll, displaying Ethan's messages next, his casual promises to handle the divorce, to make sure she walks away with nothing. A hush fell over the room, the kind of silence that signals judgment has already been passed. Margaret's friends avoided her gaze. Ethan's colleagues shifted uncomfortably, whispers hissing like serpents in the dark. Then I stood. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I simply walked to the center of the room, pulling my phone from my clutch. With a few taps, I opened my banking app. "If I'm nothing," I said softly, but clearly enough for every ear to catch, "then nothing must be worth this." On the screen of my phone, the transaction glowed. $1 million transferred in real time to an account in my name. Gasps rang out, sharper than any insult ever thrown at me. Margaret's knees seemed to buckle. Ethan's mouth fell open. I turned to Margaret, lifting a glass of champagne from the nearest table. My hand was steady, my smile calm. The room waited, breath held for what I would say. I raised the glass toward her, locking my eyes on hers, and whispered the final blow. "Happy birthday, Margaret." The crowd erupted. Not in applause, not in laughter, but in the restless energy of witnessing a downfall. The queen had been dethroned, her empire revealed as hollow. Margaret's face crumpled, Ethan's complexion drained to ash, and I stood in the wreckage of their lies, reborn from the ashes they had tried to bury me under. The room had turned into a storm. Voices collided in sharp whispers, guests pulling out their phones, recording, texting, spreading the scandal like wildfire. Margaret sat frozen, her jeweled brooch suddenly looking gaudy, her regal posture crumbling into a hunch of shame. Her friends avoided her eyes, and even her oldest allies leaned away from her, as though betrayal were contagious. Ethan stood beside her, pale and trembling, until the weight of judgment shifted onto him. The screen replayed his words in cruel clarity. "Don't worry, I'll make sure she walks away with nothing." Guests gasped anew. Some shook their heads, others muttered, "Disgraceful." And then, in a moment that would haunt him forever, Ethan dropped to his knees before me. "Amanda, please, I was wrong. I let her get into my head. I didn't mean it. I don't want to lose you." His voice cracked, desperate, his hands clutching at the air between us as if begging me to take pity. The room watched, the tension thick as smoke. Margaret turned toward him in horror. "Get up, don't humiliate yourself." But her command held no power anymore. Ethan ignored her, eyes locked on me, pleading. I stood tall, the champagne glass still in my hand, and looked down at him. My face betrayed nothing. Inside, the rush of vindication surged through me, but I let none of it show. I wanted him to feel the silence, the coldness, the emptiness, where love had once lived. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. The whispers around us swelled. People shifted in their seats, leaning forward, hungry for the next move in this unraveling drama. Margaret hissed like a cornered serpent, spitting blame at me. "You did this! You twisted everything! You turned him against his family!" I turned my gaze to her briefly, then back to Ethan, still kneeling. "Is that what you told them?" My voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried a knife's edge. That I was the villain? That I wanted to take from you? Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but I raised my hand. With deliberate precision, I pulled my phone from my clutch once more and tapped the screen. The speakers came alive, playing his recorded voice for all to hear. "The prenup ensures she gets 0. I'll handle it soon. She won't see it coming." The words boomed into the ballroom, louder than any denial he could muster. The effect was instant. Gasps, disgust, the collective recoil of a crowd that had witnessed too much. Ethan's head dropped, shame scorching him from all directions. Margaret's face contorted, realizing that the son she had weaponized had revealed himself as the ultimate betrayer. But I wasn't finished. From my bag, I retrieved printed copies of the chat logs. I read aloud the line that sealed his fate. "Once I get access to her assets, I'll file for divorce. She'll be nothing but a lesson learned." The ballroom erupted in outrage. Gasps, angry murmurs, even laughter at the audacity of his treachery. Ethan lifted his head, his face streaked with sweat, his lips trembling. "Amanda, please, that's not—" I cut him off. Slowly, I reached into my bag once more, this time pulling out a crisp white envelope. I placed it on the table in front of him, the sound of the paper against wood echoing louder than any outcry. Every eye followed my movement. "Divorce," I said simply. The envelope sat between us like a gravestone. Ethan's face crumpled. He reached for it, then stopped, as if touching it would burn. Margaret clutched at her pearls, gasping, but no words came to save him. I leaned closer, my voice low but clear enough to reach the ears of every guest in the hall. "You thought I was powerless. You thought you could strip me down to nothing, but the truth is, Ethan, I was never yours to destroy." The silence that followed was absolute. Guests shifted, stunned, unsure whether to clap, gasp, or simply remain witnesses to the ruin laid bare before them. Ethan's betrayal was no longer private. It was immortalized, public, and undeniable. I stepped back, lifting my glass one last time. My eyes swept over Margaret and Ethan, their empires of deceit crumbling before the very people whose admiration they had always craved. My smile was small, sharp, unyielding. The toast I had given earlier still hung in the air, but now it tasted different. It wasn't for Margaret's birthday anymore, it was for their downfall. And with the divorce papers on the table, the performance had reached its climax. The ballroom no longer felt like a place of celebration. It was a crime scene, littered with shattered illusions and reputations lying in pieces. Margaret slumped in her chair, her once proud shoulders caved under the weight of humiliation. Ethan remained on his knees, the envelope between us a silent verdict he could never overturn. The crowd's murmurs had turned into open judgment, their stares cutting sharper than any blade. I placed my glass gently on the table, the faint click echoing in the tense silence. Then I straightened, smoothing the folds of my dress with calm precision. Every movement was deliberate, elegant, a reminder that while they had tried to strip me of dignity, it had never truly been theirs to take. Without another word, I turned and began walking toward the grand double doors at the far end of the hall. My heels clicked against the marble floor, steady and unhurried. Behind me, voices clamored, Margaret's panicked commands, Ethan's desperate pleas, but I did not falter. I didn't need to. The war was already over. The guests parted instinctively, creating a path as though I were royalty leaving her court. I could feel their eyes on me, some filled with admiration, others with awe, all bearing witness to a woman who had refused to be broken. At the threshold, I paused. The golden doors loomed before me, a gateway between the ashes of my old life and the uncharted freedom of the new. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch Margaret and Ethan in my periphery. Their faces were pale masks of defeat, their empire of lies smoldering in ruin. A smile curved my lips, small but radiant, born not of cruelty but of triumph. And in a voice quiet enough to be mistaken for a whisper, I said the only words that mattered. I win. Then I stepped through the doors, leaving the chaos behind. The days that followed painted a stark new order. Margaret, once the matriarch who commanded respect with a single glance, found herself shunned. Friends stopped calling, invitations dried up. At gatherings she tried to attend, whispers chased her like shadows, the words liar and hypocrite clinging to her like perfume gone rancid. Her laughter, once booming and theatrical, was now brittle and hollow. Ethan's fall was sharper. His colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man exposed as both manipulator and fool. His reputation crumbled, his finances dwindled, and the woman he had once believed powerless had left him stripped of pride, wealth, and credibility. He was a man adrift, mocked openly in whispers that carried far louder than applause. As for me, I shed their chains one by one. I moved into a modern apartment overlooking the city, its wide windows flooding my new life with light. I poured my focus into a business I had nurtured quietly for years, watching it flourish now that I could dedicate myself fully. For the first time in a long time, my reflection in the mirror didn't look like a survivor. It looked like a victor. Every morning I woke, not to the cold scrutiny of Margaret's eyes or the half-hearted affection of Ethan, but to silence that belonged only to me. It was the kind of silence that didn't smother, it freed. I found strength not just in what I had built, but in what I had chosen. I had walked away when I could have stayed and burned them to ashes completely. That restraint, that refusal to drown in vengeance, was its own form of power. Because true power was not in destruction, it was in transcendence. And yet sometimes in the quiet hours of night, I would revisit the memory of that ballroom, the look on Margaret's face, the shame in Ethan's eyes, the way the crowd held its breath as I walked away. I wondered then, not with regret, but with curiosity. Was forgiveness a greater strength than victory, or was victory the only form of forgiveness they had earned? That question lingered, unanswered, suspended like a final note in a song. Perhaps it was not mine to answer. Perhaps it was for anyone watching my story to decide, is the truest form of power found in mercy or in the fire that leaves no ashes behind? Either way, I had broken the game they forced me into. I had stepped out of their rules, rewritten my own, and risen higher than they ever imagined I could. And that, more than anything, was the legacy I chose to leave.